Welcome to the second half of Chapter 8. Okay, in Section 2, we're going to be talking about largely births and deaths and immigration and emigration. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is life expectancy, which is if you survive being born, how long can you expect to live on average in different places? There are 4 things that have contributed to an increase in worldwide life expectancy. Remember, living past your 40s into your 50s was a big deal not too long ago. What has been done to continue that trend towards living longer? Good sanitation. Sanitation means that when you have to pee and poop, where does that go? It doesn't go into your drinking water where it can be contaminated by whatever diseases you happen to have in your waste. So that's what sanitation is. And also when you have your garbage, it's not being thrown into water supplies that you drink. Effective health care. So that means that you have infant care, vaccines, antibiotics, and all of that other good stuff. Reliable food supplies. So that's where the better nutrition comes in. You are going to eat every day, and when you do eat, you're getting all of the basic nutrients that you need for survival. And then also reduced rates of infant mortality. And as you can see here, that's seeking not only care for when you go into labor, but it's also prenatal care. That means before birth, and caring for a mother when she's pregnant is important to make sure she's getting the right, especially nutrition, that she needs to grow that baby. What is the current average life expectancy worldwide? It's 68 years. All right, you may need to pause this and really take in this graph. This is a demographic transition model. It is a model of economic and cultural changes proposed to explain the declining death rates and birth rates that have occurred in Western nations as they become industrialized. What are the 4 stages of demographic transition? Pre-industrial, transitional, industrial, and post-industrial. What major event determines a country's move through the demographic transition model? The advent of industrialization. And if you don't know what that means, it means moving away from hunting and gathering and towards agriculture and towards, instead of making everything that you need yourself, specializing in making one thing, making lots of it, and then distributing that through commerce to other people. Okay, what you're looking at right here is 3 lines. The red line is the birth rate, the blue line is the death rate, and then the green line shows you the total population. So, what are the trends here? Pre-industrial, your birth and death rates are high, which means that your population is low. This is kind of what carrying capacity looks like. Your population's pretty stable because although you have lots of people being born, not all of them make it to adulthood and are able to reproduce. And then life expectancy isn't very long. So you essentially are not overstaying your welcome. Your population stays pretty stable. In the transitional stage, your birth rate stays high, but your death rate goes down. So that means lots of people who are being born survive until they can reproduce themselves, which is why you see this exponential growth of the entire population happening during the transitional stage. So this is when you see those pyramids that have the fat bottoms. They're the ones where you see an explosion in growth. This is when industrialization just comes in. Now, once you hit the industrial stage, you're going to notice that birth rates also start dropping. However, the population is still going to increase because even though fewer babies are being born, they're all still living and they're all still reproducing themselves. Then post-industrial is where you have birth rates dropping below death rates, so that is when your population starts to decline. So as you're looking at this, if you're asked which stage is likely to be seen in developing countries, it's absolutely transitional. What about developed? You have industrial or post-industrial. Which one is marked with an explosion in the population? That would be transitional. Which one is marked with a gradual decline? That would be post-industrial. And honestly, if I were to give you age structure diagrams, you should be able to put them where they belong in this demographic transition model. All right, so is it possible for Earth to support a global human population that uniformly has the material standards that the United States currently enjoys? The answer is no. we would need the natural resources of 4.5 more planet Earths to make this happen. So you can see here, this actually says 4. You would need 5 planets total, so 4 more than we've got, to support the entire planet if they lived the way that the United States does. So you can see that India, although there's a ton of people there, they almost live in a sustainable fashion in some respects. When we start talking about pollution, you're going to see that's not entirely the case. All right. In Science Behind the Story, what obstacles can prevent a woman from accessing birth control and family planning services? You may have to infer this from the article. The things to take into account are poverty, stagnant economic development, that means that no jobs are opening up, low literacy rates, that means for women. There are lots of places where women are actively discouraged from going to school. I mean, as in, you will be shot if you try to go to school. Poor health care, and then limited rights for women. Basically, the fertility of the women is not in their control. The more you increase literacy and the more you provide access to health care and family planning options, the women will use what is available to them. All right, so you guys did these ecological footprints already. We've already talked about this, family planning, what that is. Family planning doesn't necessarily mean abortions. It simply means educating folks on how the reproductive system works so that you can actually plan when your children arrive as opposed to kind of reacting to a pregnancy. And using family planning, it can be responsible for a 55% drop in total fertility rates in developing countries. In other words, women have fewer children. And then also this can be used, as you can see here, to reduce poverty because, how do you do this? Not only do you invest in family planning, but it's not about handing out condoms. It's about giving women the right to control their own fertility. Also reducing poverty, because then you have less reasons to have more people to work around. But the number one way to reduce birth rates is to elevate the social and economic status of women. Where women have rights and where women have the ability to get an education and enjoy a certain quality of life, they have fewer children, full stop. All right, let's see what else we've got in here. Besides access to birth control and family planning services, what other women-oriented service can be reduce a country's overall TFR, which is total fertility rate, which is how many children each woman has on average, equal rights and power for all genders, education for women, protection from violence against women, and women in positions of power. Have your government reflect the population. If you have half men and half women in a population, your government should really look the same. Where are family planning programs working and why? It's working in China because the government forces people to do what they need to do. It works in Bangladesh because of a massive, well-funded outreach effort that was sensitive to the values of its traditional society. And you can also see that Bangladesh is not that big. So it's very easy to cover. And look, they went from a TFR of 6 children to a TFR of 2.3 children. Family planning works. Thailand, Brazil, Mexico, Iran, and Cuba all have government-sponsored programs for family planning, so it's very easy for women to access the information and the services that they need to plan when they have children. Where is it not working and why not? 2 places to remember that it's not working. Okay, we've already talked about China. And then what about in India is one of the places that's not working, and it's because there's no central effort. Plus, my gosh, look at how big India is. It's this whole sucker right here. It would be very difficult to have that kind of massive outreach that they had in Bangladesh. Let's see what else I've got on this slide. Gender bias, there's still a strong cultural preference for sons. It's also most of the poor people's Social Security. The way that they are able to take care of themselves after they can no longer work is their children do that. There's also a caste system there, so it does, it means that different castes or classes of people are literally not allowed contact with each other, so it makes it very difficult to go from caste to caste and spread family planning efforts that way. The Philippines is also a place where family planning is not working, and it's because it is a massive Catholic community. And in the Catholic Church, you don't do birth control and you don't do abortion. You will basically allow God to control the fertility of your family and give you as many children as he sees fit. So family planning does go kind of counter against what the Catholic Church teaches. All right, how are poverty and population growth linked? What are some reasons for this link? Poverty is strongly correlated with population growth because you have no access to health care, you have no access to family planning, need additional family members for income and social security, high infant mortality rate, so you want to have more kids so at least some of them make it to adulthood. And it's also nice to have, infants. Okay, we got all of that stuff. All right, how are poverty and environmental degradation linked? What are some of the reasons for this link? Poverty often results in environmental degradation because the needs of today take precedence over conservation for tomorrow. If your child is starving to death and you have the opportunity to slaughter the last tiger on the planet, you're going to do it so you can feed your family. So when you're poor, the ability to plan for tomorrow is really not an option. However, as you can see on this slide, increasing affluence, so like the United States, it can do the same thing because affluent developed countries use more resources per person than poorer countries. What that means is your wants begin to feel like needs, and so you degrade the environment that way. All right, so this is how it works. All right, so why are dollar values given in PPP? You'll need to read the fine print underneath the table. PPP stands for Purchasing Power Parity. It standardizes incomes and makes it comparable among nations by converting income to quote-unquote international dollars using a conversion factor. International dollars indicate the amount of goods and services one could buy in the U.S. with a given amount of money. So what this basically does is helps you determine where countries are developed, where they're developing, and where poverty is going to be a problem. Why do we care? Because when you go into a poor country, how it is that you tackle environmental degradation is going to be different than if you go to a developed country. In a developed country, you can say, dude, use less. When you do use things, here are some parameters. That way you'll have stuff to use tomorrow. In a poor country, you cannot do that because they literally cannot go with less because they are living on precisely the minimum amount of stuff that you need to survive. But what you can do is say things like, if you farm in this way, not only will you get a better yield where you can feed your family and maybe sell a little bit, you will then be able to farm here from year to year to year. So that kind of thing allows you to take the proper approach. How does poverty affect environmental resource management? We already talked about that. How are poverty and population growth linked? That is redundant. We talked about that already. How are affluence and environmental resource management related? How is this different from the link between poverty and resource use? You have a higher footprint per person. That word per capita, those words per capita means per person. Keep that in mind. Resource consumption can take place beyond the borders of an affluent country as well. If you crave a certain exotic wood that looks like tiger stripes to make in your cabinets for your house, you are reaching beyond the borders of your country to degrade the land in another country. It's different because resource use can be reduced in this case, as it can't in poor countries because they're basically down to bare bones. We are going to watch the story of stuff a little bit more in our class, but again, although the end results are the same, the way that you approach environmental resource management is going to be drastically different in a poor country than it is in a wealthy country, as you can see here. Both of these things are producing air pollution, and you can see the reasons why are vastly different. All right, so last thing we're going to talk about is AIDS. Understand the difference between HIV and AIDS. Identify the region most impacted by HIV and AIDS. HIV is a virus. AIDS is the syndrome when HIV is essentially activated and becomes aggressive in the body. There are many secondary infections with AIDS as well. African nations are currently the hardest hit, especially sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is below the Sahara Desert. There's no vaccine to prevent or cure it. There are drugs to suppress AIDS and prolong life, but they're very expensive. And what are the impacts? Here are some impacts. You can see what a normal age structure diagram would look like for a country that is devastated by AIDS, and then you can see the red part is what ends up happening to the population. So you have people dying off a lot sooner. You're going to see that there are not as many older people to take care of the younger people. Definitely not as many younger people. It just decimates the entire thing. How is HIV/AIDS spread in sub-Saharan Africa versus how is it spread in China? In sub-Saharan Africa, it's because of low contraception use. It's also because there are places of sub-Saharan Africa that believe that having sex with someone who has never had sex before means you can shed the HIV virus and pass it on to that person. And sometimes it takes multiple times of having intercourse with someone who's never had sex before people figure out that does not work. And then it also means that children start contracting HIV. Now, how is it spread in China? It's usually through injection of drugs. Why is this important? Because in order to tackle problems, you need to understand where they come from. It is just like having a fever. Having a fever means that you could have the flu, in which case the only thing you can do is get some rest, have fluids, take some aspirin, ride it out. But a fever can also be the symptom of a bacterial infection that you have in a cut that, unless it is treated right away, can kill you. So treating the symptoms of any of the stuff that we're talking about doesn't work. You have to understand the roots of the problem and go there to deal with whatever is going on. And you can see here a list of some global strategies to slow down the spread of HIV. All right, so what are the economic impacts of HIV/AIDS in Africa? The most productive members of society are removed, so you cannot transition to modern technologies. You have a decline in the labor force, a decline in skilled workers who would train new workers. The family and community also breaks down because of loss of productive household members. And also in cases like this, let me go back real quick. Parents die, leaving children who are infected with HIV as orphans. So kind of a big problem there. Orphanages are completely overwhelmed in these places. All right, last thing to talk about is the transition stage of the demographic transition model includes a surge in population growth, which we already discussed. How does this impact a country's infrastructure, and what is this phenomenon called? It's called demographic fatigue. Swelling populations place a strain on infrastructure, which is stuff that everybody uses, like schools and hospitals and job opportunities and social services and law enforcement and power grids and all of that stuff. So the demographic fatigue puts a strain on that. And it can mean that the country lapses back into the pre-industrial stage. So you see the demographic fatigue happening during this second stage right here. This may be a slide that you want to ponder because it kind of puts this into perspective. All right, and that's all we've got.